I'm Joan Farini-Mundy, the president of the University of Maine and our regional campus, the University of Maine at Machias. And I'm delighted to welcome everybody to our virtual roundtable in observance of Women's History Month. Our focus today is on women in leadership and social justice, the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Just a little bit of history about Women's History Month. The observance of this month began in 1978 as a local celebration in Santa Rosa, California. The Education Task Force of the Sonoma County Commission on the Status of Women planned and executed a Women's History Week. Then the first official recognition nationwide began in 1980 with President Jimmy Carter, who proclaimed the week of March 8, 1980 as National Women's History Week. These events were sort of contemporaneous with my own dissertation work, as it happens, at the University of New Hampshire such a long time ago, where I studied the reasons why women had difficulty in progressing in mathematics. You know, when I look back on that work, which was such a while ago, there were social justice issues right in the middle of it. Women were not getting the opportunities to study mathematics for a lot of reasons that I could give multiple speeches on, but I won't today, and therefore not having the access to careers that they might have had. So it's great to be coming back together with a group of incredible women here in Maine for this conversation today. The theme for Women's History Month in 2021 is Choose to Challenge, which acknowledges that while we've made tremendous progress to advance women's rights, there's still so much more work to be done and so many systemic barriers that must be challenged. And that's a fitting theme for this group of three outstanding women panelists who've chosen to challenge through their advocacy work, through their professional work, through their personal lives, and who exemplify leadership and social justice for all of us with a connection to the state of Maine. So our panelists this afternoon are Dr. Chanté Delalue, who is Vice President for Institutional Diversity and Inclusion at Brown University, and the inaugural Senior Vice President and Senior Diversity Officer at Dartmouth College coming up in a few months. And Chanté is an alum of the University of Maine, and I'll let her tell you more about that. So she's definitely had quite a lot of experience in the state of Maine, and she's coming much closer now that she'll be in New Hampshire, so we're thrilled with that. Second, Councilwoman Angela Okafor from the Bangor City Council, who is an attorney and business owner there, and Dean Lee Sofley, the University of Maine Law School, and also former Chief Justice of the Maine Supreme Court. Each of these women has extraordinary visas that could be described in great detail. I'm going to let them tell you a little bit about themselves. And I'm so happy you can be with us this afternoon. It's also possible for you to send in questions to the chat. I'd like to introduce and thank Dr. Kimberly Whitehead, Vice President and Chief of Staff here at the University of Maine, who has organized us for this afternoon and is here helping us along through the conversation. So I'm going to ask questions, but I've told the panelists that they should simply use those questions as a springboard for whatever they'd like to share with this group today. And we'll jump right in. And I'm going to start with a question that will go to Dr. Delalue. And so I'd like the audience to hear a little bit about how you have made your background, how your journey has taken you to this point, what your background has been. I will ask each of you the same question, but Chanté, if you'd begin. So sort of like, how did you land here?
Yes, thank you, President Farini-Mundy, for the opportunity to serve on this panel. It's an important month and something we should celebrate every month, Women's History and our contributions to the country and the world. So I grew up in New Jersey. I kind of, over the years, have separated my life into states. And I'm a first generation college graduate. Grew up in a home where we didn't have a lot of resources, but education was critically important. And one of my really, I would say, reasons that I have been successful was my family. I grew up with a very large extended family, mostly women. My mother has 6 sisters. And so my grandparents didn't have any male children. And so there were a lot of women around. And of the 14 grandkids, I'm the youngest female grandchild. And so that really was my first entree into my own leadership and what I could be and what I could do. I went on to University of Maine, and after living 40 minutes from New York City, growing up 40 minutes from New York City, it was very different. And but it's not something I would trade. After having traveled extensively now in my life, I can really see all the benefits of studying at the University of Maine and how it helped propel my own career. So I studied undergrad communications, my graduate degree in education with a focus on counseling, and worked at the university. So I graduated on May 20th, and May 23rd, I started my first job. And I've worked since I was 14 years old. And so my work ethic has, again, was cemented as a teenager and has carried me through my career. I went on to go become a director in Alaska, University of Alaska Southeast. And that was life-changing. I was able to engage with Alaska Native elders and really learn about sustainability of the land and the sustainability of culture. And that was applicable into all aspects of my work. I moved back to the East Coast and worked at a high school for a short stint, where I was a counselor and really helped undocumented families, underrepresented families, marginalized communities think about life after high school, and really social emotional health, right? You can help a lot of people fill out an application or fill out a FAFSA form, which is important for access to higher education, but really helping them think about how will you be successful even if you don't have all of the resources at home that other people may have at their disposal. So that was a real rewarding experience. I went back to higher ed and worked at an institution with 80% business students. And so that was a unique experience. Many of the students focused on becoming CEOs and becoming millionaires, and me having to infuse social justice and ensuring that they understood their responsibilities as the next leaders in a lot of these corporate spaces. And most recently, I've been at Brown for the last 7.5 years and serving in a capacity reporting to the president. And so my life has really been rewarding, and I lead with cultural humility. So I think about the ways in which we engage in multicultural encounters on a daily basis, but we all have limits to our own knowledge. And so I really carry that with me as I do my own work and I continue my own process of lifelong learning.
Thank you so
And I
much.
forgot to say my PhD was at University of Rhode Island and Rhode Island College in education. And so I have a love for land grant, sea grant institutions.
That's great. Terrific. Thanks so much, Shante. How about Angela? Same question. Tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and your journey.
Thank you. So I was born in Nigeria, which is in West Africa. I have four siblings. We are five of us. I'm the second and the first girl. And being the first girl, you are expected to do a lot, to carry a lot of responsibilities, take care of your younger ones. So I would think maybe my leadership skills or life, I would think, kind of started from there, trying to be kind of be my mom's assistant, kind of, taking care of my younger ones. I remember growing up, sometimes me and my mom will be doing laundry. Even my elder brother will be playing outside, and I'll be so angry, like, why does it have to be me, And so that was it. And then I studied law in Nigeria and graduated, got called to admitted to the bar in Nigeria before moving here because my husband got a job. So we moved here since 2007, and I've been here. I took the New York bar exam. The initial plan was to move to New York, but of course, life happened. We grew to like here and, of course, explore opportunities here. I'm still struggling here because Maine still wouldn't let me do the bar. But being licensed in New York, it's a long story. Yeah, I studied abroad. That is a problem. So even though I've been in active practice, because I realized I could practice federal law anywhere, So I launched my own immigration law practice here. But even at that, having been in active practice for 3 years, still applied to be approved by the main board, still they denied me. So that's a totally different story of its own. But basically, I started a law practice, an immigration law practice, because immigration is federal. And well, I wanted to also put in bankruptcy, which is also federal. But interesting thing was to practice bankruptcy, you have to be admitted in a federal court. And we have a federal court here in Bangor, but I went to get, know what to do to get admitted, but I was turned down because I'm not licensed in Maine. So I had to bring up this because this is part of the diversity and inclusion that we're talking about, And so at some point I decided, of course, I couldn't get any reasonable job. As even a licensed attorney, I worked in a dish room, washing dishes just to get my foot in the door, of course, until I got frustrated and I couldn't continue. So I decided to start up an international market. That also had some personal connections to me because, coming here, when I first came, I could hardly see a person of color. Like it was when, if you saw someone who looked like brown, like remotely brown, you're like, oh my goodness, is that a problem? That was how this place was then. So seeing people that would come, especially to Houston, to study pharmacy, Black people, and then by the end of their studies, they moved back. So it was personal to me that I wanted to see people stay. So I thought one of the major things was African food. So which led me to starting up the international market. I made it international because I felt, there's a lot of division anyway. So why make it just African where there are a lot of other small communities? So I made it international to, and then at some point when I first came, of course, our hair is very important to a Black woman. I couldn't braid my hair, but I couldn't even find anywhere to braid, to have my hair braided. So then when I first came, we came on a H-1B, which is a professional visa type. So only my husband could work. Myself was a H-4 visa holder, spouse to him. I couldn't work. I could live here, but I couldn't legally seek employment. So Mama, can you stop this? Thank you. So life of a working mom in a pandemic. So I couldn't legally seek employment within the 5 years. So being stuck at home, I learned to braid hair on my own head. So that became a problem with people, being able to find hair care services. And I launched the hair care business here. And I worked with the University of Maine and the Black Students Association to start the hair care fair that happens every year, except this year. So that is how I got where I am. And then in 2019, January, I became an American citizen with my husband. And by November, I ran for the city council, and thankfully, and I was honored to be the first person of color and first immigrant to be on the Bengal City Council. And I'm a mother of 3, one behind me right now. So, thank you.
And who's this behind you? Can we be introduced?
Mama, you want to say hi? Do you want to say hi? Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Angela Lee.
Thank you so much for inviting me, President Farini-Mundy. This is just wonderful. And I'm really honored to be here with these amazing women. And I just want to start by saying I have led a really privileged existence. And I've more and more in these recent years have come to understand just how privileged it was. I grew up in Southern Maine. I am the oldest girl. I have 2 younger brothers, although both of them are in their 60s now. So that's been a delight for me. Both of my parents went to college. My dad's an engineer. My mom was a nurse turned business person. It was always assumed that I would go to college. I went to the University of Maine, which was UMO when I was there. I'm that old. And I got an absolutely amazing education there, and then went off to work for a little while and decided that I wanted to go to law school. One of the amazing things I've learned as my career has progressed is that when I left high school in 1972, there had never been a woman or a person of color in a judgeship in the state of Maine, ever. All of the judges in Maine, when I was graduating from high school, which doesn't seem that long ago now, were white men. And it was pretty amazing to look back on that. When I graduated from law school in 1980, my law school class was the first class in which women were almost exactly equal in number to the number of men. And that happened very rapidly. So I went out into a profession where women were new. And I learned very quickly that I was very often going to be the only woman in the room. My job for about 10 years before I was appointed to the bench was with the Attorney General's office, which was just an extraordinary legal opportunity. But once again, I was often the only woman in the room, and I was among the very first women to be a deputy attorney general, working with 8 or 9 men, and often having really interesting conversations because the point of view can be quite different. What really strikes me when I look back on my own career and my own privilege was that my parents taught me, if you work really hard, you can do anything you want to do. And I've always believed that. So I work really hard. And then I realized that, in fact, being a white woman in a primarily white area gave me opportunities that I later learned others did not have. And the first time I came upon some extraordinarily awful prejudice was when I went as a young attorney into the northern counties in Maine and realized that for decades, the policy of the United States and the state of Maine had been to take Native American children from their parents' homes and find white homes for those children. And there were generations of Wabanaki children who were torn away from their culture, their parents, everything that they knew. When I was arriving in that area of geography and law, the world was beginning to understand what a horrible and unconscionable thing that had been. And so one of the things that has happened very recently, I think in 2015, the Maine Wabanaki State Truth and Reconciliation Report was issued, going back through all of the terrible things that had been done for decades, where no one questioned it at all. And it was not until that time that I really began to understand how pernicious a culture can be when no one says, stop, that's not okay. I was appointed to the bench in 1990 and served on the trial courts and the appellate courts. And an awful lot of what I focused on with the bully pulpit that a chief justice gets were the children and families of the state of Maine. And in that work, I came to understand how differently some of our youth were treated, and learned that at every stage, school, and then into the juvenile justice system, and then into the adult criminal system, the decisions that were made changed depending on the ethnicity, the color of the skin, and all of that happened with laws that on their face are completely neutral. So we did a lot of work with juveniles in Maine, and I'm very proud of that work, but we haven't done enough. So I just want to fast forward to, I became dean at this amazing institution in April last year. A month later, we watched George Floyd die. It was horrifying to watch that. And one of the things that really still stands out to me, and I'm sorry I get verklempt, is that all of us went, we haven't done enough. We are not doing enough. We are assuming we've done enough. We have to do more. So at the University of Maine School of Law, we set up a DEI task force. We are working on listening. We brought in youth so that we could hear the voices of our Black and Native American youth who said to us, stop asking us to relive our trauma and start changing the system. Stop having meetings, stop asking us to share, and start changing the system. So we are working now to try to make a difference in everything that we do. And we are determined that this will not be one more round of lots of meetings, and that changes will actually be made. So I'm grateful to be here today. Thank you, President Farini-Mundy.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you all. There would be so much to follow up on in every remark each of you has made. So instead, I'll go to another question, or somewhat general question, and I'd like to begin with Angela on this one. So from your own perspective and point of view and experience, can you talk about the place of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the context of social justice?
Thank you, President, for the question. So, like I said, I was the first girl in my family and the second child. And, you know, growing up in my family, I had to help my mom to cook. I had to help my mom do laundry, everybody's laundry. I had to watch my younger child sibling. I had to this, I had to that, I had to that. Like I said, I remember growing up, a lot of times my elder brother would even be playing, but, you know, I had to do this and do that. And I feel just like right now, and also a very apt example is, you know, look at me struggling with children, which is the same thing with a lot of other women in this pandemic, you know, having to either lose our jobs to take care of children, or, you know, cut our times, or just whatever we have to do to be able to walk around children. So I feel that diversity, inclusion, and, you know, we need to be very purposeful in the way we do things, you know, to equal the playing ground for everybody, because women, we are at the receiving end of everything. And especially even Black and brown women are at the bottom list of every, you know, receiving end of every marginalization or every struggle. I would, one other thing I think that most times we tend to not, or to overlook or not think truly about is, I feel that also in this whole struggle, we need to be more purposeful in raising our boys. Because with all this, you know, talk about women making all the efforts, I will give an example. Let's say I have 2 boys and a girl. And then let's say I'm raising my boys and I'm telling them, you know, this is what a boy should do. You're a boy, you should do this, or you shouldn't do that. You're a girl, you should this, you should that. So as a boy, they would obviously grow up looking at the girl as the weaker, you know, that, oh, she's a girl, so she can't do this, or she's a girl, so she has to do that, and I have to do that. So I think from home, we tend to condition these boys to grow up and come into the public and to look at women as that lesser being. Does that make sense? Like, you know, lesser being, so they can't do this or they can't do that, or they shouldn't go to this, or they shouldn't do this because you're a woman, you have to be, you know, be a princess, you have to talk slower, you have to, you know, not assert yourself, you have to not this or not that. So I think in the process of trying to fight for this social justice, we need to, apart from looking at the systems, we need to also be looking at the homes. Because in as much as we talk about Black, brown, you know, diversity in relation to race, when it comes to women too, we need to. Because if we train, no matter how much we train women, girls to grow up to be strong women, if they still have to battle and fight with men who don't see them as human beings or as equals, all our efforts will be close to futility. So I think we need to start to try to balance that, because I don't think social justice will really be as close to its best if we only face the system, but we have individual duties too to play towards that. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very interesting. You talk about being purposeful. You talk about, Lee talked about, as we heard her account, talked about the request from the voices you heard to be to stop asking to do something, to do more than have reports. There's a theme here. So I'm going to turn to Shantae next and ask the same general question and any interpretation you want to give to the place of a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and at the same time working to achieve social justice in our institutions. As an educator in particular, any thoughts you might have on that?
Yes, thanks for the opportunity. And what Angela and Lee said definitely resonate with me. So the way that I think of it is that it's and both as opposed to either or. And sometimes I think in society as individuals, we get stuck like, oh, we either need to be focused on this or focused on that. And so my thoughts are diversity is composition. So having access, right? And so Lee's story is a great one. My story of coming to Maine and Angela's story of coming to Maine and being sometimes the only one or one of a few, right? That was an access point. There was a time when we were not at the table. We were not even allowed to be at the table, right? And we have a whole history of women and people of color being left out of policy making and voting and you name it. And so diversity is the access point, composition, who's there, who's not there. Inclusion is once you have individuals there, do they feel a sense of belonging? Because you can bring as many people as you want, but if they don't feel included, well, then your work may be for naught. That social justice piece is really critical. And sometimes I think we leave that part off, right? So a very general definition, if you just did a simple Google search of social justice, is distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges. Well, how do you get to that distribution? It's through your policies and your practices. So, when Lee talked about the individual, the youth who said, hey, look, we've raised our voices already. We said what we had to say. Now do something. The do something is changing our policies, reviewing our policies. Are they equitable? Who do they leave out? Oftentimes we'll have the things that are, it's just the way that it is. I think when you enter the state of Maine, it says the way life should be. So have we interrogated that? Not in a bad way. That's good. But who is left out when we don't consider all the various backgrounds and histories and experiences? And so to me, the social justice part is critical to actually changing the kind of, this is the way it's always going to be and this is the way it's been. It allows us to be creative and to make sure the diverse voices that we've given access to and included are now a part of the policy making and changing, especially when it comes to education. Because when we bring in those different voices, we know that innovation and creativity will thrive. Right? When you bring in people who have different backgrounds, we all come from very different backgrounds. And together, if we were to put our head together on a project, we're going to come up with something really unique and different because we're coming from it from a different lens. And so the social justice part says that everybody's voice is important at the table, not just the voices that have always been there.
No, I'm going to keep with this theme and have a question for Lee that relates to it, which is, we're hearing a lot about voices at the table. We're hearing a lot about the valuing of voices and about the importance of really interrogating our practices and our policies in ways that adjust them to make sure that it's possible for that kind of voice to be present and the access to be there. So, as you are hearing from people in your community about this, what are some ways to actually take all of this forward? And again, since you and I both are part of the university system, I'm very interested in your ideas about what we can be doing right here within the University of Maine system.
That is such a great question. I think it is the question that you and I and others have to be asking ourselves because, and I love the way Shantae put it, diversity is who is at the table, but inclusion tells us who is actually engaged at that table. I fear in many ways that Maine is at the very earliest stages because we do not have a lot of diversity at the table. And so the first thing I think we have to be doing is getting really aggressive about reaching out to our communities to bring students. This is all going to be from the perspective of education, because I think it unlocks the doors to seats of power. And until we get diversity in the seats of power, we will not have a really good shot at making sure we have equity everywhere. So to get people into the seats of power, they need the system of education. And we in education need to be reaching out. We cannot sit back and say, we're here if you find us. And that becomes important at every single stage, from early childhood to higher education. And I'm going to focus for a minute on higher education, because one of the things that we heard from Angela is something I am struggling with right now. And I'm trying soon to bring a group of people together to help me think this through. There are a number of wonderful, brilliant legal professionals, primarily from African countries, who are here in Maine, who are trained in legal process, but aren't yet or are right now not licensed to practice law or to do those other aspects of providing access to justice in Maine. So there are judges and lawyers who are here among us who cannot practice those wonderful skills that they have. We need to find a way of bringing those professionals together and connecting them to our institutions in a way that the institutions are ready to help them get licensed, find jobs, become part of our communities, and find their way into the seats of power. And so we start, I'm looking at adults who already have had a profession and have now come to Maine. But I think in the university, we also have to start looking much younger. We need to be talking to our youth of color about expecting that they will go to college, that they will find a place in college, that they will get great educations, and that they will eventually come to someplace fabulous like Maine Law. But if we sit back and wait, it's not going to happen. It hasn't happened in the last decades. It's not going to happen if we just sit. We've got to get out into the communities and help bring people so that we have the diversity we start with, and then we build the inclusion when the diversity begins.
So I'm going to challenge that a little bit and ask for anyone to comment. I think it feels to me like we have to do them at the same time, right? Because if there is no space, no sense of how to belong, then I imagine it's pretty hard to open up the access, right? And so they kind of go together, which takes me to another question that I would very much appreciate the insights of any of you on. And it has to do with, I mean, and it's just happening here automatically through this discussion, but it doesn't happen automatically in lots of conversation. And that is how to best talk with people about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and make the case for it. I think tying it to social justice is very important, but I have found in my encounters with people here in really wherever I've been, but here, that we are in lots of different places. And I'm just going to give my first example. My best way of learning has been perhaps a bit like Lee's, by bringing together groups of students of color, particularly, groups of students that include young women, particularly young women in some of our STEM fields where even today there can be issues of feeling included, and having, listening to them, but hearing the same thing that Lee is hearing, like, you know, quit asking, get going and do something. So we here at UMaine have launched a President's Council on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion that Kimberly Whitehead co-chairs. And my charge to them was to look at structural barriers and areas that we need to take up. And they've already given us 45 recommendations for how to do that pretty quickly. So that suggests to me that there's a lot there. And so I feel like we've got a way to start that conversation, but that's not the case in every place or in every kind of context. So ideas about a way to do that that will work well.
You know, I experienced that when I was in Maine and in other states as well, of meeting people where they are. And I learned pretty quickly that I don't know if Maine is still the whitest state in the country, but it was for a long time in terms of demographic representation. That you can't wait until you have more diversity, right? Like there's an urgency to this that regardless of your background, we need everybody to find their place in this work. So what I think really is the start, because President Farini Mundi, I agree with you that it's simultaneous work, is critical self-reflection. We have to get people to see themselves as a part of this larger conversation. One of the things I experienced a lot in Maine was there's a way in which we talked about diversity as other, right? So diversity was like everything that wasn't white. And it's like, well, wait a minute, there's diversity amongst white people. And people would say, no, like one, they weren't comfortable saying the word white. Two, they just didn't see themselves as a part of this. And so I think that it starts with this critical work of like, what is my family's background? Who am I? How is that different than some of my white neighbors or white people if I'm from Southern Maine, white people from Northern Maine, right? There's different cultures within the state of Maine. And so I found that to be an entry point that allowed people to kind of say, okay, I see myself in this. I can start to now engage. Because if you just jump straight to social justice, it is foreign. It's like, well, that's this thing that happens outside in this other place. As opposed to, no, it's a part of like my everyday life as well. And then that way you don't have to wait. So I love the story that Lee gave, because when she talked about early in her career and going up and hearing about the experience of Native children, you don't have to identify as Native American to say, wait a minute, something really doesn't feel right with me. You just, you know what I'm saying? So you can almost use your own experience to then apply it to what would that feel like if somebody came and ripped my child away from me and placed them in a home and they lost their culture, right? So there's a way in which empathy can be tied into this cultural reflection to allow people to engage in the work.
Thank you. Thank you. Other thoughts, reactions? Yeah, I at least have a frame of reference for how to think about this in a university a little, but Angela, as a member of a city council, what is it like there?
Thank you, President Farini Mundi. So on the city council, I don't think it's anything that different. I think it's the same rule pretty much applies everywhere, just maybe a little tweak here and there depending on the area. I quite agree with Shante, but another thing, a little more thing I think to add here is when we talk about diversity, of course, who is involved, and then inclusion, whose input is actually being utilized. But I think also another part of it, when we talk about the systems and actually doing something and still not asking people to share and relive their experiences, another thing I think that is very, very important to note is adding economic values to those voices. I work with a lot of students and a lot of other young people. And one of the things I hear a lot is, they just want us to come and talk and talk and talk. And what happens? They take our opinions and then they go and get credit, and I don't even get paid or acknowledged. This is very important, because when you talk about inclusion, you cannot tell me, oh, you can say your opinion and we'll actually put it you use it to make policies. But then you get paid, but I get the idea and put it forward. I don't get paid, or I don't get some accolades attached to it. So I think this is also something else that, when people say, don't make us relive our trauma, or don't ask us to share, that is one of the things they are telling you without knowing how to say it bluntly. you know, and economic value is a very important thing when we talk about inclusion. That is why I like to use being purposeful, not just telling me, oh, when you speak, we are going to listen to what you say, you know, what you say is important. But then, you know, everybody has their bills to pay. So when we talk about economic equality, that is part of it, being purposeful in everything. I want to hear your thoughts. That is an exercise you're doing. That is job that you're doing. You're thinking, you're giving those values, you're giving those thoughts and opinions and ideas on how things can be better, but what are you getting in return? You know, people have to pay their bills, and this is part of it. So I feel when we talk about, you know, talking about diversity, inclusion, we have to also be talking about, you know, this, and then making the system, you know, in a way that, like I said, being purposeful in every single way of, you know, being that inclusive, not just having one person and saying, here we have it, you know, just be dangling that one person, but also make it in a way that, you know, that one person has someone to turn to, you know, because it can be very draining to you know, have one person be the only voice always talking about diversity and inclusion. So to start to talk about things like this, we have to find ways to use the system to make it possible so that that one person doesn't get burnt down. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question that I think has come in that is a little bit tied to this theme. So the person has written, in most cases, we know what work is necessary to promote social justice and to increase diversity in seats of power. There needs to be an investment in doing that work actively now. It's not exactly a question, it's a comment. But I think it's tied, Angela, to what you've said about being purposeful. Again, you know, this is okay. We know what we need to do. We need to invest. What does that look like, Lee, as you're thinking about what you're going to do with Maine law?
So I think that that is at the heart of some of the actions we need to take. The investment, particularly if you're talking about higher education, has to be in providing those scholarships and the support for paid experiential education that make it possible for students of color, for Native American students to come to these universities, get that education, and to get the interim jobs that take them through their college careers. They, in many instances, we are finding that the economic difficulties, and I think coming out of the pandemic, we're going to have even more challenges around this, so that it is only those who are privileged enough whose parents can take care of all of those, the fairly extraordinary costs of coming to college, going to law school, getting the opportunity to do the various externships and internships. We have to actually invest. And it's interesting that the Maine legislature has required certain scholarships throughout the university, and there are several of them at the law school, but they aren't actually funded. So we run into these great ideas that in which there has not been sufficient investment in a variety of different ways. And I think that just getting to the point where we can offer scholarships and housing support and that experiential education support along the way will make a huge difference, but it requires money. And that is what we all have to accept and push hard to do.
You know, there was a piece of what you said that I wanted to pick up on where you talked about helping people to get, I think you said the interim jobs, the jobs along the way. And indeed, there needs to be financial support for that, but there needs to be access assistance to that too, right? This is a pretty small state. And I think making one's way into certain kinds of groups, certain sorts of networks, certain kinds of potential areas of long-term professional reward is something that we can be intentional about in different ways.
it's a very good point, because if you talk to people in the legal community or around issues of justice, which is where my career has been spent, everyone will tell you that success is in great part a measure of the connections that you make. And the intentionality of helping people make the right connections is going to be critical in the middle of everything that we're doing, to go from step to step. And that is back to intentionality. I think you're right on there.
Here's another question. As students, how can we do this? How can an ally help?
That was the exact word, that ally, that came to my mind, and this is coupled with the previous statement. I have, in my time, in my career, in my experience, people who have power don't easily give it up. So what we're talking about is a shift of power and an allocation of resources. So it has to be both. And so the way in which you get there, we have to have a longer discussion, but those two things are critically important. I'll say this, and I like this saying, I don't know who to attribute it to, but your resource allocation is a statement of your values. So where you put your resources, it tells everyone what you care about. And so we tend to do this thing where these concerns are add-on. So people are either too tired to do them or don't have any money. Those two things, no time and no money. Well, let's stop talking about them as add-ons and let's talk about them as center to what you do. If it's central and it's core to what you do, it's a statement of your values, then you're going to do resource reallocation, right? And make sure that we're putting our resources towards the things that will ensure these diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, all of it is moving forward in a positive way. And so what can students do? I think what I have found and what I did as a student was find who my allies were. This is daunting work. And we're talking about undoing hundreds of years of a system that was designed to benefit a particular group of people. So no one person should take on the work alone, and no one person can do the work alone. So to me, it's always going to be a small few. There's always a small few in history that changed the world, right? Find your small few and work on the issue that you're most passionate about and keep chipping away at it. For me, I'll be doing this for the rest of my life. Even in retirement, right? Because it's that important to me. It's a way of life. It's a way that I see the world, in a way I see the world can be. And so I think for students, it's finding other people. They may not have the same background as you, and that's okay. But are they committed to this work? Are they committed to ensuring that there's equity? Not equality, right? So not that we have a pie and we slice it and each of us, all who are speaking today, get two pieces. No. If Lee started out and with an honest assessment, right? You know what? I grew up privileged. That's somebody I want to become an ally with. She already started the conversation by acknowledging her privilege, right? So these are the ways in which I think you find people who are committed to the work and see themselves in the work and can be honest about their own experiences.
You know, you use the language of it's a way of life, it's a way you see the world. And I think people are in different places with how they can be with that. So one of the questions that was kind of queued up as a possibility is what has been the most challenging and most rewarding aspect of your involvement in this work? And when you said it's the way you see the world, it's your way of life, I thought, well, there at least it's just like fully infused, it's who you are. Other thoughts, Shante, from you or from others on what's most challenging, what's most rewarding?
Thank you for the question. For me, I would think that one of the most, I would say one of, because I think there are quite a number of them, but I would think one of the most challenging for me was, coming out in the public space and being judged just because, of who I am, or how thick my accent is, or that I have an accent. I remember when I was running for Bengal City Council, I ran, side by side with 11 other candidates. And there was an article written about me. and about all of us. And, you know, a lot of, there were, of course, supporting comments, but there were a couple of comments that really hit me so hard, like, you know, is she being supported because she's a person of color? You know, the focus was, is it because she's a person of color? Is she qualified? You know, and finally, one of my supporters responded. I mean, I had to hold myself not to respond. So one of my supporters responded and said and asked, "I'm surprised I've not seen you question all the other candidates. Why does it have to be only her? In case you don't know, you know, someone attached a couple of other articles. She's a lawyer, she's this, she's that, you know. I'm sure your question came from the fact that she's an immigrant and she's a Black woman." You know, it was, you know, it's challenging to kind of try to see myself through other people's thoughts, you know, how they view me, how they criticize me, how they talk about me, some without even knowing me, or, you know, knowing half of my story, or just because people are supporting me to just say, oh, is it because she's Black? Is it just so it will be, you know, instead of trying to understand without even asking other people if they are qualified. You know, that is one of the biggest things. I mean, we go through people questioning us, but, you know, privately, but to have to face it publicly, you know, it was challenging. But I would say I've had quite a number of very fulfilling things, experiences too. First, coming on Bengal City Council, you know, I wasn't sure how or where I was going to start, but when I first came in, you know, I've seen a lot of changes. You know, my children go to schools here in Bengal. And before I got on Bengal City Council, it used to be, you know, that like things like racism didn't happen in Bengal, you know, but now every corner of Bengal, pretty much you turn around, there is a conversation on diversity and inclusion and being purposeful. So that is one thing. When I look at it, I'm like, okay, you know, at least my children will, you know, they would keep growing, and, you know, things. I mean, I know it won't automatically be very easy for them, but at least, even if, just like Shante said, you know, chipping it away one whatever at a time, you know, knowing that hopefully this conversation will continue to go on, and no matter what, things will be a little easier for my children, no matter how small. But at least that is one thing that, you know, that one of the very fulfilling experiences, I would say, have for me. Thank you.
So you see some hope for the future, but it's hard work for everybody.
It is, you know, I believe that no matter how small, you know, so long as steps are being taken,
Yeah.
you know, I think it's always very important. Keep moving, no matter at what pace.
So we've had a question come in that I think is in this general thematic area. It goes like this: how do you suggest we as women make sure our voices are heard within the classroom, the workplace, and our government? How do you suggest we work with men who are sexist?
Okay, so this kind of made me smile, because, you know, my story about, you know, growing up, and like I said, I mean, it's not easy in any way. As a woman, you're basically born and looked at as, you know, like, for example, growing up in Nigeria, you're being told as a woman who to marry, when you're expected to be married, what to study, whether to go to school or not even go to school, just get married. And, you know, it should be your highest achievement as a woman, you know, and all that. But I think one thing I've felt that has been very helpful for me is, I mean, there is no way to look at it that is easy, but, you know, you have to find a way. Reading the environment first helps. Mm-hmm. Just like Shante said, you know, there is always one or two people that, you know, and I believe that when you are being yourself, those allies, sometimes they will find you. They will see the truth. They will see your strength. They will see your power. Of course, there are going to be a lot of them that want to shut you down. But, you know, find what it is that makes you feel comfortable. Find what it is that makes you, you know, kind of covers up for where you feel you have some lack. For example, I love fashion. I love to look good. So when I'm going to places I feel like, you know, I'm going to see a lot of, or maybe I'm going to struggle a little bit. Dress well, look good, make your hair well, you know, those are the kind of things. It's true, it may sound like a very little thing, but these are things that can be a little reassuring to you that, you know, something happens, but you're like, oh my, well, I look good. You know, it kind of boosts, it can boost confidence. Find those things that make you kind of boost your confidence or your courage. If there are topics being talked about, you don't have to know all the topics. I mean, nobody is an embodiment of knowledge, but find that tiny part of it that you truly, truly understand. You know, enjoy yourself on it. You know, try to show off on it. There has to be a way, but you have to understand the circle of where you are to help you know how to thrive in it. Because if you don't understand, you're going to dive in and, you know, they're going to make a whole mess of you. I mean, it's not easy. And again, it still boils down to trying to also educate men. While we try to educate and empower women, I think we need to start to focus too on educating men and, you know, making them understand that you have to understand that when a woman is passionate, she's passionate. She's just not yelling or being angry. She's not just, you know, when a woman is a good leader, she's a good leader. She's not just being bossy, you know. And we women too need to be more supportive of each other and not just tearing down on, you know, oh, who is she? Who does she think she is? She's a strong, powerful, hardworking woman. And we as women need to be acknowledging that, because sometimes it may take just a bystander to put back a man who is overstepping in their place. Thank you.
You know, years ago, I worked in a place where the leaders were mostly men, but one of the higher leaders was a woman, and I was being appointed to a position with a group of the key leaders, and her advice to me was, you're the education person, but find a way to talk about things in addition to education. Even not unlike what you just said, Angela. Have an opinion, come to the table with something, and it will change. And it did change the dynamic. We're running out of time. This could go on. I think we need to do more of these. There are two questions that I'll get out on the table and use those as opportunities for each of you to make a kind of last comment. One is, what can we do as student leaders, this coming from, I believe, UMaine students, to help first-year students learn to think for themselves and start conversations about DEI? And what are the best ways to educate people? Sometimes people get defensive even when you're trying to educate them on social justice issues. So this is now coming from students who want to be a part of this. Why don't we close with sort of your advice from each of you to those students. I'll start with Shantae, then to Lee, then to Angela to close.
Great. Thanks once again for this opportunity. And what I would say with those questions is that those questions make sense to me, right? If people didn't ask those questions or weren't apprehensive or pushed back, then I would think that there was actually something wrong. Because again, we're talking about hundreds of years. It's the system that the country was built on. So the way I engage in those situations is to ask questions, right? So if I'm engaging with someone and I sense some apprehension, I'm going to ask the question. So what about this is scary to you? What about this seems threatening to you? What about this causes fear for you? And see how they respond. Because that to me is where people are operating from. When they don't understand something or they are not wanting to engage, is because they have some level of fear or something is going to be taken away from them. And we know that that's not what this is about. This is about being equitable and fair and giving people opportunity and access that they didn't have before, or they've been historically barred from access. And so I, as a social scientist, I always think in forms of questions because I don't want the wall to come up. I want to actually know. And if they say something that's offensive, well, that lets me know their position. So you have to be prepared that they may say something that you don't like, but at least you know what you're dealing with. And I think that's the advice that President Farini Mundi, when the person told you about engaging, that's where those little pieces come in. You're going to get all kinds of pushback, and students, you may experience, I don't like the word syndrome, but imposter, that you're an imposter in the room. Sit with that and then find ways, as Angela said, to rebound from it. It doesn't mean you have to stay stuck there. And so what are you good at? What are your strengths? And then go there. For me, I had to repeat certain poems to myself when I was at UMaine. Phenomenal Woman by Maya Angelou was one of them, because I had to remind myself that you don't look like everybody else and people may have a certain thought, and that's okay, but you are phenomenal and nothing will ever change that. And so you come from people who survived one of the most traumatic experiences in recent history in terms of the Atlantic slave trade. So you were supposed to be here, you were made to be here, you were born to be in the place where you are. And so I didn't always have that thought. Sometimes I felt like, oh, I don't know, I shouldn't be here. But I used ways in which to refuel myself, to remind myself, yes, you do belong, and your voice and your presence is critically important.
That's hard to follow.
Right.
That's really great. And I'm just actually going to repeat a lot of what you heard from Shantae. For students who want to be allies, reach out, ask questions. Remember that everyone comes from a slightly different place. Don't assume that you know what you're going to hear from the students you are trying to include. Let them tell you where they are and what they need, and just keep acting, keep reaching out.
Thank you, Lee. And Angela.
Thank you. So for me, of course, re-echoing what everybody, Shantae and Lee said, but one thing I would add too is, all right, I lost my line of thought now. Give me a few seconds, please. Oh man. So the question was how to advise. Okay, so I would say one thing I've noticed in my public life is that sometimes when I try to talk to people, I get viewed as this perfectionist, this know-it-all. But I've learned that, and most times, not like I don't achieve positive results sometimes, but I've realized that I achieve most when I first of all show my own vulnerability. Some people may disagree with me, but in reality, yes, the system was built on a lot of racism and the slavery and a lot of bad, horrible things on Native Americans, Black people. But at the same time, this was centuries ago. If I come to you, the system, for example, Lee, she first started by acknowledging her own privilege. She realized that she didn't make this, her ancestors did. But she, at where she is, realized that this is not okay. And I have a place, I have the power, or I'm in a position to try to make this better. But if I come to her and I'm like, oh, you are a white person, you should this, you should that, what would we achieve? But realizing, okay, you are struggling. I also have the struggles, and this is my own vulnerability. I think it makes it more welcoming for her to see, okay, I'm struggling, but I see that she's struggling too. So at least we can struggle together. So I think this is one thing that we need to start to, because I feel like sometimes a lot of people tend to now be walking on eggshells, and these days everybody easily gets angry. But if we keep getting angry at everything, nothing will have to work. I'm not saying the system is right, it's not in any way, but at least we have to find ways to know, okay, it has to be one step at a time, and always try to stay as positive because if we are not that positive, it's going to be more difficult to work with people. So I've realized that most times, showing that even though I'm a Black person, there are things I still don't understand. I think it kind of puts me halfway with the other person. And I think most times I've realized people kind of take off their shells and then we start to talk, which is most times is the target for me. Thank you.
Well, this has just been amazing. So much more to say, so much more to talk about. I would like to thank Angela, Lee, and Shantae. I'd like to thank Kimberly also for getting us organized and for thinking to do this. and to say that I do hope our listeners have found this an interesting and helpful and provocative session. It's certainly making me think. I'm back to the critical self-reflection and reading the environment as really important for me personally in taking away from this kind of where to go next. So thank you to all of our panelists, to all of our organizers, and also, of course, to our audience for your thoughtful questions, for your interesting ideas, and wishing everyone the best for Women's History Month. Thank you all.